Hey, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to look at how we can add in pagination and implement infinite scrolling within our SwiftUI app. So if you actually just go to the API that we were using before, which is the requested API, and to learn more about API, check out my video, What is an API in the SwiftUI take-home test course. You'll see that you can actually add a query string to specify pages that you want to go to here, as you can see. So what we want to do is we essentially want to allow users to actually scroll through the pages, and when you see a certain item on the screen, it will actually fetch the next set of data for us. So let's look into how we can actually implement this API now. So let's go back into our Xcode project. And the first thing we need to do is we actually need to create some kind of property in our endpoint file, which we'll use to basically allow someone to actually pass in the page number for the people that they want to get. So let's go into our endpoint. And to see these changes, I actually did a video where I actually refactored our networking code, so you can check that out. And what we want to do is on our people, we want to simply just add a new associated value called page. So what this is going to do is it's going to essentially just signify what page you want to grab the people from. So you'll be able to actually pass in a number of people. So going back to our API just briefly, if you've never saw this before, what this is called, it's called a query string. So what a query string is, it allows you to have a key value pair. So this is the key and this is the value, and you can basically signify query strings by using the question mark after your path. So we essentially need a way to actually add this into our URL when we're building up our request. So in our endpoint, we're going to actually add a new computer property within our bunch of computer properties here. And we're going to add one in called query items. So a few things to note here is that we've actually declared this as a dictionary because if you looked at our API, they're both actually strings, so it might as well be string string. And we've marked it as optional as well because you might actually not want to send a query item within some other paths. So for example, when you're actually getting a user's detail or creating a person, it doesn't really need query items if you look at the API documentation. So now we have this in place, what we want to do is we actually want to create that query item from our page associated value that we had in our enum case within our query items. So let's do that now. So what we're saying here is in the query items is that we're going to a switch on self, and with our people case, we're going to return a dictionary with the page as a key and the associated value as the value within our query string. So for any of the other paths that we have, we're also going to return nil, so we don't send back anything. Cool. So now we actually have that in place, we now need to actually update our URL code to actually add this in. So if you scroll down, where we actually have this URL component, what we're going to do now is actually build up our own array of URL query items and actually pass this into URL components. So let's do that now. So what we want to do here is we actually want to loop through our dictionary and actually create an array of URL query items. So we're going to do that by using compact map. Now the reason why we're using compact map is it actually helps us filter out any nil values as well. Cool. So we simply just go through each one of our elements within our dictionary, and then we create a URL query item using the key, which in our case here would be page, and the value, which would be the associated value from our enum case within this array. Cool. So one thing that we want to do as well is that we actually want to append this query item where we add a delay if it is debug, and that's the reason why we made this a variable and not a constant. Cool. So now we've added that in, and then finally we need to actually just set our URL components to use this dictionary that we have here. So now we actually have all the changes that we need within our endpoint file. So next thing we need to do is actually update the logic within our view model. So let's go into our people view model. And then within here, we now need to create a new property for actually storing and handling our page that we're on. So just here, we're going to create a private variable called page, and it's going to start off on page 1. Now you'll see that we actually have an error here, and that's because our enum case people now expect an associated value. So for our page here, we'll just simply pass in a new page that we created, like so. So just to see this in action, let's actually go into our people view, and then we'll just run it. Cool, and you can see that it works just fine. So this is us grabbing the first page. Now what we want to do is we actually want to fetch more data when the last item appears on the screen. So if you scroll to the bottom, so in this case, when you see Tracy Ramos, what's going to happen is we're actually going to make another call to the service to get page 2. So in order to actually do this, in our view model, we want to create a function to tell us if we have reached the end. So let's go back to our people view model. And for now, I'm just going to simply pin this so we can actually just work side by side. Cool. And then within our people view model, we want to create a function in here that you can use outside of this class called has reached end. Okay, cool. So what is the purpose of this function? So the whole purpose of this function is to tell us if the user has reached the end. So what we want to do within this function, we want to do a comparison where we basically check to see if the last user in the array matches the current user that's being passed into this function. So in order to write this statement, we're just going to say users, which is using the users array here, dot last, the ID is equal to the user that you passed in, .id. So if we reach the end, we essentially want to execute a function to actually fetch more data. Now that function that we're going to use is not this function here, because this function is specifically for us getting all the data at the start. We actually need to create a new function that will help us actually fetch a next set of users. So we'll actually type this one out together. So let's create a new function underneath here, and we'll call this function fetch next set of users. Now, because we're actually going to be updating our UI as well, we need to mark this function with the main actor. And then also as well, we need to mark this function as asynchronous. Cool. So within this function, the first thing we want to do is we actually want to increment the page number so we can actually fetch the next page of users. So all we want to do, first of all, is say page, and then plus equals 1. So this will increment the page by 1. Then what we need to do inside of here is we need to write our do catch for executing our code to actually fetch users from the API. So our functions are a bit similar, but there is a tiny difference. So the difference is that we essentially don't want to just replace the whole array with our response. Instead, what we want to do is actually append to the array. So let's actually just copy this code here, and then we'll just paste it. And then rather than us actually replacing the whole array, we actually want to add the data that we get into the array so it shows underneath our items within our list. Cool. Sweet. So now that we have that in place, so we have code to actually tell us when to fetch the next set of users, and we have code to actually get all our users for us. So let's actually look at using our has reached end with our new function within our people view. So let's go into our people view. And then what we want to do is that on our person item view, we actually want to use the task modifier to basically check to see if we've reached the end, and then if we have, make a request. Cool. So let's just run this to see what happens. And as you can see, we're actually able to get all of the users. So as soon as Tracy Ramos comes onto the screen, you can see that actually gets the rest of our users. And when we scroll to the bottom, we actually don't get any more users. And the reason why that is because this API only has 2 pages, so you can't just like do unlimited infinite scrolling. But if you used to use an API with more than 1 page, you'd actually see more data. Now, when we're actually doing this, you might think that what we've done is valid, and you might think that this is okay and it works, but we actually could face a potential problem. Now, it hasn't happened yet, but what could happen is we could actually trigger like unnecessary calls to a service when we don't need to. Now, in order to actually stop that and prevent us from making unnecessary calls when we don't want to, we actually need to check to see the state of our view model and actually prevent it from executing this request. So let's go into our people view model. And then we're actually going to create a new enum within our view model that allows us to control and see what the current state is of this view model. Cool. So we've got our enum here, and it represents different states. So fetching is going to represent when we're fetching more data. Loading is just going to be when our screen is loading, and then finish is going to be when we finish everything. So what we want to do now is actually use this view state within our file here. So rather than having this property called is loading, I'm actually going to refactor this to say view state, and it's going to be of type view state and optional. And then now you should realize that we actually get quite a few errors because loading doesn't exist. So let's replace this is loading with our view state. And in this case, we want the view state to be loading, and then in our defer, we want it to be finished. And then within our fetch set of users, we want it to be the same thing. So we want to call the view state and actually set it. We actually want to set the view state twice. So we want to set this to be fetching, and we want this to be finished like so. Cool. So if we actually build this, you should see that we actually have some more errors, and that's because in our people view, it's expecting this is loading, and we don't have that anymore. Now to fix that, what we're going to do is just create a is loading computed property within this class that allows us to basically just tell us whether the view model is loading or not. Cool. And we're actually going to need a computed property to tell us when we're fetching as well. Cool. So now when we build it, we shouldn't have any more errors. Cool. So let's go into our people view. And then this time, what we're going to do is that we want to check to see if you've reached the end of users and we're not currently fetching any more data. So we're just going to use the and then we're going to use a bang to say view model, not fetching data, like so. So one final last check I do want to do, yeah, is within our people view model, is that we actually have a property on our user response that tells us the total pages. So what I actually want to do is I want to basically make sure that we actually don't even like attempt to make this request if we've already reached the limit for our total number of pages. So within here, we're actually going to create another property called total pages. I'm just going to make it an optional int like so. And then within both of our functions, we're just going to set that from our response. And we're going to set that in within here as well. Like so. And then what we're going to do is in our fetch set of users, we're going to actually make sure that we don't even cross this line if we've reached the limit. So we're going to say guard page is not equal to total pages or else return. So don't even attempt to make this request if we hit the total pages. So now we have two ways of knowing our view's state, and we also make sure that we don't execute unnecessary requests when we're actually calling the service. So let's actually just test this out and see what happens. And now you should see that we're actually getting back our data just fine. And it looks all good. Cool. So now this looks good, right? But what about if you're in a situation where it's actually in a slow like API, because this API is quite quick. So I'm just gonna add in a delay of like, let's say 4 seconds. So let's just run this. And now you should see that it's obviously gonna take a while. And then when we actually want to get our next set of data, you'll see that it's actually doing something, but we don't get no feedback to tell us that something is going on. So we have no idea that it's actually fetching the next set of data. So how can we resolve that? Well, what we could do is give some users some feedback that something is going on in the event that the API is taking a while. So in order to do that, what we just need to do is within our people view, we need to use our new view state to basically check to see if we're fetching data, and if we are, then we simply want to overlay a progress view at the bottom of our screen. So we're going to do this on the scroll view. So let's just find our scroll view within here, like so. And then on our scroll view, we just want to say dot overlay. And I'm just going to say if the view model is fetching data, then we want to say progress view to show that on the screen there. Cool. So add in our overlay. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we set the alignment to be bottom. So this will put it in the bottom in the center of our screen. So now let's actually just run this. You should see the progress view at the bottom here while the content is loading. And then when that finishes, boom, our content will now successfully load in like so. So this is working pretty good. Sweet. Now there is one more thing that we need to look into before we wrap up on this video, and that final thing is actually resetting our view model state. So on our screen, it's obviously possible for us to have pagination, but one thing that we do want to have on our view is this refresh button. Now what we want to do is we actually don't want to have to refresh page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We just want to refresh the whole screen and almost like reset to start again, because you don't want to execute like 10 requests if someone's on like page 10. So in our people view model, we're going to create a new function to basically help us reset our view's view state. So in here, let's create a private function. So we're going to say a private extension called people view model, and then the function is going to be called reset. And then within our reset, we're going to check to see if the view is finished loading first. So we only want to reset if we've actually like finished loading some content. And then within here, we simply just want to reset all the properties that we care about. So we scroll to the top, we want to reset our view state and our page number, total number of pages, and our users array. So let's start from the top. So we'll do our users array. So we want to remove all the items within the array. So after removing all our users, we then want to set our page back to 1. After setting our page, we want to set our total pages to 0. And then we want to set our view state back to 0 as well. Cool. So we're literally just kind of just resetting back our properties to their default values that they were originally. So now in our function, we want to call our reset. So let's actually just test this out now. So let's actually just run this on the simulator, and you should see that it fetches all our data. And if we actually hit the refresh button, you'll see that it basically just kind of just resets it to do what it was doing at the start again. So now we have pagination within our app, and we're able to actually fetch more pages within the future as the API grows. Sweet. So that's everything in this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comment section below. Also, as well, if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up, as well as subscribe to the channel and hit notification bells to get updates for whenever I release a new video. That's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.